The year is 1991 and we've had a pretty exciting time of gaming. We've tried our hands at Final Fantasy IV, Sonic the Hedgehog, Duke Nukem, Alien Breed and a whole range of other great games. And then, to top it all off, passionate designer Eric Chahi gave us the sublime masterpiece known as Another World, also called Out of This World or Outer World depending on where you're from. A game that took near 2 years to make, and mostly by one person, there isn't much to say that hundreds others haven't said already. Recently remastered and available on many platforms and clients such as GOG Galaxy, Another World can be played on both remastered and original aesthetics with the press of a button. The new version brings about some very impressive visuals while keeping with that same classic vector style and appeal of the original. I'd really recommend having a playthrough on both settings, though of course nothing really gives it that same life and atmosphere that the original design does. This is a platformer with a few puzzles, interesting yet simple storytelling and just a wonderful blend of art, both visually and auditory. Another World is cinematic, atmospheric and captivating, and although short, it's an unforgettable experience. If you haven't played it yet, you really do need to give it a go, it's well worth your time. Now there isn't much in the way of characters, but there also doesn't need to be. The game offers a good and straightforward narrative and flows seamlessly and feels like an 80s sci-fi experience in the absolute best way. Playing as the protagonist Lester Knight Shaken, or however you pronounce that, we are made to feel special from the very start. From the hero introduction of our character, the car skidding to a halt, the spy-like lab, and the subtle mention of our Ferrari, which by the way is meant to be a 288 GTO. I guess I could see that. Apart from you playing as Lester, there are also a few minor characters and memorable creatures. Of course, there's our escapee friend Buddy, who plays a rather significant role alongside you. With Buddy being an alien and the protagonist Lester being human, there's no Hollywood magic where both somehow inexplicably speak English, and this is where the visual storytelling really shines. Gestures and movements are all that Lester and Buddy have to communicate, and although the game has made us feel quite lonely until our meeting with Buddy, we still feel just that little bit out of touch because of this gap. We are still a foreigner on an alien planet after all, and we never once feel at ease. The realm of Another World is a fantastic one with clear influences from masterpieces such as Dune. The soft and almost pastel-like colours are limited and used sparingly instead of throwing every possible hue at the screen. It isn't bright or vibrant but rather bland and really adds to the depression of being stuck in a strange world. Now, as I've mentioned before, the remastered version does offer some very beautiful changes, as slight as they may be in some parts. I hate calling a remastered of a classic an improvement, as it can only enhance but not necessarily better any of the original artworks. The enhancements in the game are faint enough to not feel like a different experience, and it's almost like they've really just increased the pixel count in some scenes. It's worth playing through on both settings, or even just switching between remastered and classic every time you get a chance to. In the pixelated realm of Another World there's a lot to see, and they didn't try to give detail to things that don't need it. Even the aliens at the very start that we come across are plain and simple black figures with only their eyes visible. The creatures remain intimidating and the simplicity only adds to their threat. Of course, being the early 90s, there wasn't much more available in terms of graphics. It's no secret that Another World was on the simple end when it comes to graphics and visuals, even for its time, but the game builds so beautifully on what it had to work with that we feel immersed regardless, and it gives the game its own unique character. A lot of people are under the impression that games don't age well, and yes, with the fast improvements of CG this is true in some cases, especially with 3D. But when it comes to 2D animation, this isn't quite applicable. Aside from the vast amount of different styles of 2D art out there, it has its own life that isn't really comparable to that of 3D. Imperfections are charming and make it unique. At the time of Another World's creation, and considering Eric Chahi's limitations, it was of course the best that he could squeeze out of the game, and it really needs to be no more. But since then, an interesting thing has happened in the gaming industry and the world of art. Pixelated design is no longer a forced limitation today. It's unique and special and can be just as impressive and breathtaking as any other form of art. Of course, one of Another World's points of difference was the use of vectors, which is something I'm personally a very big fan of. This gave Chahi some flexibility for the animation and the opportunity for much more lifelike movements thanks to the way that vectors work. Alongside the simple yet impressive visuals of the game, we are treated to some real 80s style sound at the dawn of the 90s. Charming in its plainness, the sounds in Another World aren't overused. They are selectively put only where absolutely needed. Now, not only does this create an often tense environment, but it also forces us to pay more attention. We are not blasted with a soundtrack of music that muffles the experience either. We are giving snippets of exactly what's applicable and suiting to the atmosphere. Jean-Francois Freitas sculpted a musical experience that does exactly what it needs to. It gives us a sense of awe in the grand scheme. It builds tension when we're overwhelmed or caught off guard, and it chases us through the action. Listening to the soundtrack by itself even puts you in an uneasy and on-the-edge mood, as it so perfectly encapsulates the latent hostility and uncertainty of the game. Combining the visuals, sound and music, Another World isn't just a game where we are in control of every move, it's also incredibly cinematic. The creators clearly understood the conception of interesting and suspenseful moments. For example, the incredible introduction. Just note that long pause. Long enough for us to know that something is coming, but keeping us on the edge of our seats, waiting for the inevitable. This is true suspense, and when it does finally happen, it's startling and fantastic at the same time. And then we are instantly pulled into a rush that ends up dropping us right into the gameplay. This was a time where there wasn't a clear distinction between cutscenes and gameplay as there is today, with different quality and rendering between the two. And for this very reason, these moments just feel so much more a part of the whole experience instead of being a break from the gameplay. The complete lack of a HUD or any on-screen information just worked so perfectly in fortifying this balance. Of course, there are quite a few of these masterly crafted cutscenes, as small and as short as some of them might be. Even simple encounters are blended with cuts and layered so well over each other that we don't feel distracted with the swap between gameplay and cutscenes. We are a part of it. The gameplay of Another World is pretty straightforward. There's no fancy leveling system or unlockables. The game is more about the adventure and escape from this strange realm. Basic movements, some small amounts of fighting and a bit of creative thinking, and a whole lot of trial and error is all you need to best the game. The puzzles aren't unreasonable or impossible to figure out, though some of them do go a little beyond what your intuition tells you, and it can get a bit much sometimes. You don't need to be a master platformer gamer to enjoy it though, but you can expect to die often. The game can be obtusely unforgiving at times, though not always frustratingly so. The remastered edition does give you 3 different difficulty settings in case the masochists do want even more of a challenge, or less if you are more into it just for the experience. The story of Another World isn't complex or full of intrigue, but it plays so well into the experiences of 80s sci-fi. We are introduced to Lester as he arrives at his lab and starts working on an experiment that soon goes wrong. There aren't any amazing twists or deep plot points, but it throws us into a sci-fi world to explore and adventure through, and that's really all it set out to do. After a short introduction with a simple enough puzzle, we're thrown in jail where we meet Buddy. Most of what follows is an escape from the prison and its guards towards an eventual, though rather unconventional, ride off into the sunset. The game doesn't try to be serious or deep, it embraces its simplicity and cheesy sentiment. What more can be said? Another World is a classic and a masterpiece of its time and of this time. This is a game creative built around cinematic experiences, memorable visuals and perfectly suiting audio to top off a classic sci-fi story that's just a blend of pure nostalgia and art. Another World, Out of This World, Outer World, whatever you may call it, is a must-play for anyone and everyone who needs to see just how great something can be without overcomplicating it. And let's be honest, it's worthy of many replays too.